And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for joining with us today. We have John Aziz, a British-Palestinian writer, musician, and peace activist known for his analysis of Middle East politics and history. He's contributed to publications such as Quillette, Foreign Policy, and The Atlantic, where he discusses topics related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and advocates for peaceful coexistence. John, it's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Yeah, so you and I, we've kind of been circulating similar spaces on similar virtual spaces, primarily on Twitter, and I've always appreciated your message of peace and coexistence. We have all too many people only fueling the radicalization, only taking extreme stances that do nothing but further promote radicalization and disagreement, which ultimately, as we see, leads to violence. So anybody fighting the good fight, working on reconciliation, I consider a friend, so it's an honor to have you on.
It's a difficult, long and uphill struggle, and I think most of us, including me, realized how messed up we were going to be, certainly for a few years after the 7th of October and with the subsequent war in Gaza. I think that, as I said, it's a difficult struggle to start the ball rolling on reconciliation and peace, and we're a long way from that now. But I do think that ultimately is the right position, the right long-term outcome. And so I feel like if I want to have any impact on this at all, it will probably be that I would want to advocate for peace and want to say that this is what is the long-term inevitability. Neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians are going to go anywhere or back down or cease to exist. So that's the position that I'm coming from, because I don't want to live in a world where people are living in fear and in terror of bombs dropping on their head, or being blown up, or being displaced from their homes. I think that that's a very horrific and abnormal state of being. I think that most people, the vast majority of people, are essentially normal people who want to have a good job, want to spend time with their family, want to be able to live in a reasonable location in a nice house, and be able to travel freely and be able to go around and if you want to go to the beach in Tel Aviv, I think you should be able to do that. I think the status quo is very sad, and it's reflective of a horrific disagreement that has taken place between two kind of countervailing national narratives, obviously Zionism and the Israeli cause, and obviously Palestinian nationalism and the Palestinian cause. So how are we going to get there? Well, it's very difficult, but I know what the destination is, and that's the destination that I believe we have to travel towards.
That you make a great point that the destination, I think, is much easier for many of us to comprehend and agree upon, despite there being mass disagreement on the destination as well, right? Some people, for them, the destination is for Gazans to leave or for Israelis to leave. So there's not consensus on the destination, but at least that's something that we can envision and then kind of figure out how to get there. So I think you make a great point that that's at least where we should start, by knowing where we want to go. One of, yesterday when I promoted a little bit that you'll be coming on, some people were giving pushback. I talk to anybody that, like, even Nazis. So like John Aziz, a peaceful guy, like, I don't know what you're trying to convince me to do, not having him on. But people were critical of it. And one of the critiques was that they said they feel that you are more critical of the Palestinian side than the Israeli side. How do you feel about that critique?
I think that I'm a Palestinian person, so I've visited my relatives in the West Bank many times. I don't like going through checkpoints. I don't like living under military occupation. I think that it's important to be able to criticize your own side. I think if I was Israeli, I would probably spend a lot of time criticizing the Israeli side, probably a disproportionately large amount. I think that if I criticize the strategy of the Palestinians in achieving self-determination or other goals, I think that that's a normal and legitimate thing to do for a Palestinian. I think that Israeli critiques of Palestinians are not as meaningful as Palestinian critiques of Palestinians, just as Palestinian critiques of Israelis are not necessarily as meaningful as Israeli critiques of Israelis, because ultimately the side that can change the actions of their own side are people within that side. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, a perspective of Palestinians have agency, Israelis of course also have agency, and there's always something that you can do, because I've always found it very useless and frustrating when I hear people on my own side saying, well, we just have to keep resisting and eventually peace will come when the Israelis decide there's going to be peace. I find that quite, it almost seems like, to me, like it's perpetuating the conflict in a sense, because it's kind of playing into the narratives of the far right in Israel, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that Palestinians ultimately just want to destroy Israel and want to deny Zionism, rather than playing into the narratives of the left in Israel, which is that Palestinians are just like anyone else and we want to have peace and it's possible to have peace together. So I definitely come from a perspective of, I'm Palestinian. I want to talk about what Palestinians can do that will be effective and reasonable and successful in achieving self-determination for Palestinians, which I strongly believe in, but also peace between two self-determining states, with being Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, so that's something that very much resonates with me, about how you think that you're going to be more effective to speak to your own people. And when I reflect on why I am, at least vocally, more critical of Israel than Palestine, or Israelis over Palestinians, part of it is very much coming from a place of introspection. The last thing a Palestinian needs is just another Israeli telling them why they're bad, or why their government sucks, or why this whole thing's your fault. No one's going to listen or hear. If that were to, and look, we could sit here and I could critique both sides all day, plenty, right? There's no shortage of critique. But again, Palestinians are not interested in an Israeli just telling them why they're bad. But other Zionists, Jews, Israelis, and pro-Israel supporters around the world will be much more receptive to hearing somebody who actually genuinely cares about the people living on the land. My whole family lives there. It seems like that's where the reception is going to be, me to criticize my own. And I don't think this is only in a more effective strategy. I think it's just the more virtuous way to live. Like when we have a problem in life, an interpersonal issue, a sign of emotional immaturity is to find why the other person is wrong and to blame them and to not take any responsibility. So what we commonly accept as a virtue in day-to-day life, we become completely blind of when it comes to conflict with their neighbors. At that point, it's like it's all them. We take no responsibility. They're bad. Right. We're good. And we hear the narratives on both sides are so similar. If you talk to people living on the land, they'll say, we can't have peace because they don't want peace. We've tried, they don't want it. There's the complete finger pointing and zero ability for introspection and taking responsibility. And it's sad. So I think that the primary critique of Israel should come from Israelis and Jews, and the primary critique of Palestinians and Palestinian leadership should come from Palestinians. And that it just seems like a much more effective way for us to change our societies in a way that will bring us closer to peace. So
that's right, and that's what I do also hear on my side. I hear a lot of people saying that we've tried peace, we tried Oslo, we tried negotiating, we tried the Great March of Return. That's another popular kind of talking point. We tried all these peaceful strategies. We tried the first Intifada. That was mostly non-violent protests, and it didn't work. And ultimately, the argument goes that the Israeli position, the real Israeli position, is the Greater Israel Project, and Palestine will not exist, and Palestinians at best go to Jordan and Egypt, and at worst go to Saudi Arabia. So that's the pushback that I often get. That they don't want peace. The other people on the other side don't want peace. And there are people on the. I understand there are people on the other side who don't want peace. There are people on the other side who just want to win, right? And there's people on my side who just want to win. But ultimately, I can't change the behavior of the people on the other side. And Palestinians generally can't change the behavior of the people on the other side. The way that the thing that we can change to kind of engineer our way towards peace, I think, is our own behavior and is our own side. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to maximize the prospects for peace on the Palestinian side, and I hope that people like you and people with a similar perspective to me on the Israeli side will say, how do we maximize our prospects for peace, and how do we change our own behavior to maximize our prospects for peace? Because we know there are people on both sides who don't want peace, who just want to win, and that's just something that I understand and that I expect. But I want to maximize the chances and prospects for peace by focusing on the things that we can change, because we do have agency. You have agency. We have agency. I know. There's a kind of there's a popular talking point that does get thrown at me quite a lot, which is that Israelis have a lot more agency than Palestinians, and I accept that. I think that's a reasonable point of view, simply because Israel is a state. It's fully recognized by the UN, and supported by America, and supported by multiple very powerful organizations and countries around the world. That's true, right? Israel is more powerful than the Palestinians. Fine, I understand that, but I still can't change the behavior of Israel because I'm not Israeli and I don't come from, I can't talk to my Israeli family because I don't have, so it's certainly Israeli Jewish family. Actually, I do have some Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab family, but I don't think they even vote in Israeli elections. So I mean certainly I do advocate for peace with Palestinian citizens of Israel too, of course. But I suppose this shows that it does go both ways. That there are some kind of people on both sides. But you can only change the things that you can change. The things that you don't have any power over. It's almost like I can't change Benjamin Netanyahu's mind, right? Ultimately, that's going to have to come from Israelis. It may have to come from Israelis voting for different leadership and a different government. So I change what I can, and I want other people to change what they can.
Amen to that. On the point, you bring up an interesting point about Palestinians, and this is really one of my largest critiques of Israel over the past few decades. It comes down to the talking point. You hear that Palestinians have tried peaceful resistance, and it has been met with violence. And there's in fact a lot of truth to that. I would say that some of the descriptors of what peaceful resistance is, I think it's debatable. Is that like the March of Return? I don't know, when you have 30,000 people trying to cross a sovereign border, I don't know if that could be considered peaceful. But generally speaking, Israel has made a huge mistake in not giving a clear, peaceful means for Palestinians to achieve their goals, right? So if people have goals or political demands or desires that are not met, and they don't have any way to achieve those, violence is often the response to that. Again, this is not the same as justifying violence. I think we should always seek nonviolent approaches, and we should be inspired by nonviolent leaders of the past, like MLK Jr. and Gandhi, who have fought very strong opposition and succeeded through a primarily nonviolent approach. So we do have examples that should inspire us. But what I say to my fellow Israelis and to my government, if we don't like Palestinian violence, we need to give Palestinians a way to achieve their goals, not using violence. And most Palestinians don't have, and for good reason, don't have any vision for what that looks like and how to achieve that. So while violence is not the answer, we need to create a system on the ground that doesn't almost encourage it. So that's something I'd like to see Israel transform tremendously. I just don't think we have the leadership, or any, like, not only do we not have the current leadership, I can't think of a leader that's going to come in with a vision to change this. But hopefully I'm pleasantly surprised by our next leadership.
Here's something that I think that leaders on both sides can do to try and help things along if they really do want peace. I think that there has to be sort of like a much more concrete and material set of here's what will happen. Think like requests, I suppose, not demands, requests. Here's what Palestinians need to do to achieve a state. If Israel laid out their timeline and what that would look like. And again, on the Palestinian side, here's what Israel can do to achieve the things that they want, suppose recognition as a kind of permanent Jewish state. So if Palestinians were more clear, or the Palestinian leadership was more clear about what we want specifically from Israel that Israel can do, and then if Israel is more clear to Palestinians what is specifically what you need to do, right? And I'm not saying that these requests would necessarily have to be fulfilled. It kind of starts a negotiating position, right? So if there's much more clarity and substance on what people actually want, specifically what they want and what they can do for each other, rather than Hamas, for example, it makes demands. It's like, we have these hostages now. You need to release these people in the jails, and you'll get your hostages back. I'm not. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like clear steps along a timeline, a pathway towards peace, and a pathway towards coexistence. What would it require to achieve this? And then we can see the demands of both sides, and then we have much more of a position that we can negotiate from, because I think ultimately it's incredibly important that there is a resolution through mutual agreement and mutual consent and negotiation, because that I think that's the only way it's really going to be livable. If it's one side superimposing everything on the other side, I think that's just going to create more resentment. Potentially it's going to create more discord and not the app and dislike and anger. And I think the approach of imposing your goals hasn't succeeded for either Hamas or for Israel. It's they both there's a dictatorial approach that you can see to some extent on both sides, right? Hamas's ultimate position is Israel has to go. The Zionists who came over the last 150 years have to go back to Europe, and Israel's position is, it's you have to accept that we're a Jewish state and we're here to stay, and I suppose it goes in practice. It goes a lot further. You have to basically accept that what you call the West Bank and what we call Judea and Samaria is now going to be open for Jewish settlement. So right. I think imposing these things hasn't worked in the long term. But one thing I will say, I think unfortunately for Palestinians, it's worked a lot better for it. The raw power game has worked a lot better for Israel. Israel is, a relatively secure, relatively modern, relatively westernized, relatively stable state. And we Palestinians are, by contrast, we don't have a state. So again, I wrote about this in one of my Substack articles. When people come at me with this criticism, oh, why do you talk about the Palestinian actions all the time? Well, it's far more desperate and far more keenly necessary for Palestinians to achieve the basic things that they need, like, for example, self-determination, no more military occupation. Palestinians just we don't have the things that Israelis take for granted. So it's a much more desperate situation in general. That's why I'm much more focused on talking about what my own side can do to achieve at least some level of normality, some level of self-determination.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. It's like if in hindsight, it seems like any opportunity Palestinians should have gotten to, they should have made any concession and just agreed to anything. But that's like in hindsight. It's much more clear that at least the quality of their lives today would have been better had they agreed to something 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 75 years ago, 85 years ago, right? There is these opportunities. So in hindsight, we could reflect on and be like, okay, this clearly wasn't the right strategy to defeat Zionism. At the same time, their response to reject a Jewish state on land they view as their own is very, very normal, right? We could think of many other examples throughout history. Like if the Native Americans didn't fight the Western colonizers, they probably wouldn't have been genocided. But at the time, fighting the foreigner who's claiming their land for your own, it seems like that's the thing you do. So I try to not hold it against Palestinians while also recognizing that maybe we should try a different approach. And when we look at what both sides, what's most important to both sides, for us Jews, it's really a sense of security. We want to know that we'll be safe on this land. And for Palestinians, it's justice, I would say, more than anything. And to many, I would say many Palestinians prefer justice over life. If they could sacrifice themselves in this lifetime for justice in the future, then that is a worthy sacrifice. And I think that is what still drives the movement towards we will resist until we achieve all our goals. Now, I think it's important. We're not going to change we're not going to change either side in what is important to them. We shouldn't attempt to. So I believe what we should try to do is propose solutions that achieve both these goals. There is a way to keep Jews on the land safe while Palestinians get a sense of justice. Now, the thing with justice is there's a lot of like subjectivity to it. How do you interpret it? What does it mean? So there's not going to be what we can call complete justice. And also there probably won't be complete security. There's going to be a period where things are a little bit messy in order to solve this, as they're messy now. But I think this is how we need to be looking about it. How do we give Jews on the land security while giving Palestinians justice? There's many ways to do that. I'll tell you one way not to do that is ethnically cleansing either side, which is becoming an all too popular position. There's an interesting comment here from EMS goes, peace with who? A genocidal government whose democratic voters want ethnic cleansing. And
some of them do. Some of them do want ethnic cleansing. I hope that a lot of desire for ethnic cleansing, that to some extent it exists on both sides, will go away as the wounds start to be, scabbed over, and as peace. If we can develop peace, a lot of the and that does start with a ceasefire, right? You have to have steps towards peace. You need step 1, step 2, step 3. It's not going to start. Snap your fingers. Oh, we have peace. You have to take practical steps towards that. And I hopefully as we go along the line with more steps and we take more steps towards peace, the desire for ethnic cleansing will start to drop, and will start to fall, and people's desire for revenge and some of these more radical ideologies will fade. Hopefully, will fade into the background more. But I think you get to your destination by taking step 1. You can't get to your destination by refusing to take step 1. So yeah, I certainly agree that security is a reasonable request on the Israeli side. I don't think that it's normal to have a country where people have firing rockets at you or blowing up buses. I wouldn't want that for my own people, whether that's in the UK or whether that's Palestinians. Because I also think that the desire for justice is a just one, right? It's a virtuous one. It's one that is founded on good principles, on principles that will lead to lasting peace. I think, again, you mentioned subjectivity. I would tend to agree. Part of the difficulty of defining things in terms of justice is that people have different senses of what justice is. Different Palestinians will have a different. If you ask 100 Palestinians for justice, for what is justice in the conflict, many of them will say no security at all for Israel, and they all have to go to Europe, right? So that would seem to contradict. I think that ultimately it's like a two-sided equation, and you have to balance the sides. And you can't go to justice for Palestinians that is going to take away security and justice for Israelis. You have to kind of have both the best for both people. That's what I envisage is the best for both people. And Palestinians will get self-determination, freedom, coexistence, and yes, Israelis will get security. And if you can get both of those things, then that's a wonderful thing. But the problem is if you don't have one or the other, if you lose one of them, then there's resentment and there's rancor and there's dislike, and people will, there is a risk of returning to the conflict. But to get to our destination, and I'm glad that we agree on the destination. I think practically the first thing we have to do is take step one, take step two, and keep the faith while we take those steps, because there probably won't be immediate results, right? I've been passionately talking about this issue for longer than since before October the 7th. My impact increased after October the 7th, but I was still deeply committed to the idea of peace and coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis before that, and things got worse. I think a lot of people, I was participating in like small peace groups on things like Facebook, and I was tweeting a little bit about it. I think after October the 7th, a lot of people would have got discouraged. And I've seen a lot of people, who used to participate in these peace groups. I've seen some of them posting, Palestinians posting messages in support of Hamas, right? For example. So that is discouraging to me, but I also see the discouragement in them, that these were people who were at one point were like, okay, we recognize the Israelis are not going to go. We Palestinians, we also want to have our state, and we want to have freedom. And I think it's just terribly sad that they've got discouraged and they've gone off in a different direction, and they think the answer now is Hamas. So I haven't got discouraged. I still fundamentally believe in the path of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, and I fundamentally believe in the self-determination for your people and for my people, and the human rights and the individual rights of all of us. I view you guys as our cousins, to be honest. The fact is, we do come from a common source, right? Both genetically and nationally. Probably we share some common Israelite ancestors, and the narrative that you are European colonists is actually that's not something that there was a reason why the Jewish people were in Europe, and that was that they were displaced by the Roman Empire. And similarly, we are also the Palestinian people. Many of us are descended from indigenous Levantines, many of whom were Jews, Samaritans, things like Christians, who stayed in the land and converted to Islam. So from my perspective, the justice is that we are cousins, and that this is our land together. And I'm not going to descend into I hate you and I want to take revenge and I want to defeat you, because I don't think that that's worked. I don't even, maybe I want to defeat you has been more successful for the Israeli side, but the reality is that even for the Israeli side, it hasn't succeeded in solving the overall issue, right? There's still an ongoing conflict, and as this goes on and on and on and on and on, it gets worse in a sense. Sometimes it does get worse. Like October the 7th was a kind of a tipping point where things just actively got much worse. I don't want it to get any more worse. So let's try and move our boats into the direction that will take us hopefully towards peace. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But we have to try. We have to try.
As your people like to say, inshallah. Inshallah. So I want to actually expand on that comment, because EMS, I'm going to continue engaging with this comment because I think it's an interesting one. So I do also want to point out that with just the change of one word, it could sound something awfully similar to what a Zionist would say, right? So peace with who? A genocidal government whose democratic voters want ethnic cleansing. If you were to say peace with who? A genocidal government whose population want ethnic cleansing, that would be relevant for both people. Now, I want to, in a sense, be charitable to not the position of ethnic cleansing, but how people arrive at that position. It's not uncommon to want a population that you are in conflict with to just leave. It's actually a very natural desire people have. If we were to poll both populations, Israelis and Palestinians, if they support the other side leaving, you would get a majority of both sides supporting this. I think it's important to understand this, because the better we understand humans and how we respond to situations, I think the better equipped we are to find solutions that both sides are likely going to agree with. So both sides would support such a policy if it was on the table. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to listen to the people. We certainly shouldn't. This is an example of why the international community and international law is essential, because if you leave it up to warring parties to decide what is right and what is wrong, well, that's how you get genocide, ethnic cleansing, and all these war crimes. That's why we need international law in the international community. So I think this is a great example to demonstrate that. Now, just to continue on another point, the problem is fundamentally there are no two sides. So in a sense, there's one side that's far more powerful, and with power comes responsibility. I think most of us would agree on that. But the reason I look at both sides is because both sides do have a government body that can act in a way that can impact the situation. So as long as both sides do have actionable steps they can take that would change the situation, I think that's a very legitimate request. And additionally, going on another comment, which I actually very much appreciate, you're saying you don't care much for the cousins narrative. All Israelis have a right to be there because they are there. I actually really appreciate that pragmatism more than anything. I do think the cousins thing is important because we need to start building a unified narrative and unified bonds. I don't think that's what gives either side the right to land, but I think it's important for building ties. But you're right, both populations are here, so we have a right to stay. I think that's the best way to look at it. But for that reason, I also see there's two sides, because at the end of the day, both people are here to stay, and we need to find a way to live with each other, initially as neighbors and eventually as friends. And that requires both sides being able to recognize the humanity in the other. So I'm not in any way delegitimizing the importance of understanding power dynamics and who the more powerful side is, but there's certainly benefit towards recognizing the agency of both sides and seeing what actionable steps each side can take to bring us closer to a peaceful resolution. And John, if you want to build on that, or
yeah, I mean, I don't reject the power dynamic argument completely, right? There are differing levels of power in any conflict, right? There was if you go back to any war, you'll find that there's one side that has more power than the other. Very, very, very rarely do you have a war where it's a complete draw and a complete stalemate, and no side makes any advances on the other. I think that Palestinians generally, we do feel like we have a terrible lack of agency and loss of agency. If I would like people of an Israeli background to imagine you're living in Gaza or you're living in the West Bank. What you need to be able to answer the question, what would you do if you were Palestinian? I think that just answering that question, just thinking about that question is kind of a helpful step, because it forces people to confront that there are two sides that are both having their own priorities and that are engaging in actions based upon that their beliefs and their history and their daily experiences. The daily experiences for Palestinians in either Gaza or the West Bank are difficult. It's horrendous if you're in Gaza and your house has been destroyed and now you're living in a tent. Just as it's horrendous if you're in the West Bank and you have to go through checkpoints and you have, to go to, you need permits to get it to go to East Jerusalem. There's all sorts of complexities and difficulties involved in living with this kind of frozen conflict. I want people to at least try to empathize with each other. I think that's such an important thing to do. And I personally, maybe it's harder for Palestinians who are on average are in a more difficult position to try and empathize with Israelis. But I think it is also important for Palestinians to try and think, what would you do? What would you do if you were an Israeli who wanted peace? What actions could you try and take to to change the situation? So I think trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other is a helpful exercise. It helps people to understand that there are differing levels of agency. I do think that the Israeli government is the organization with substantially more agency than any Palestinian group, right? That should be obvious. There are also global factors involved in this. There are global players. There is the United Nations. There is UNRWA. There is the United States. There is the European Union and the UK. So that all of these players do have agency and do have power in this equation as well. It's not just Israel has 90% and Palestinians have 10. It's much more like, is the Israelis and the Palestinians are kind of standing on the backs of everybody else, and all of the other actions, including historical imperial actions like by the the British Mandate and the Ottoman Empire, that have kind of cast us into these positions that we didn't create this. Furthermore, the people who are alive today, oftentimes we are kind of trapped by the actions of our own ancestors to some extent and the choices. And you mentioned the history of Palestinian rejections of peace offers. And I mean, it's tragic that the current Trump plan, at least on the face of it, is essentially expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, when the previous Trump plan, which was not a deal I would have accepted, by the way. I don't think any Palestinian would accept the previous Trump plan. At least the previous Trump plan was some kind of two-state solution, and that's kind of the tragedy. It feels like we're being squeezed, and we always want to go back to the last thing that we rejected before that, whether it's the 67 borders or the Oslo plan or the negotiation with Barak or the negotiation with Olmert. I think I do sort of understand your point of view, that or what you said, that if only Palestinians could have taken one of those deals. But I understand why Palestinians didn't, and it was because there wasn't a level of recognition and justice in those plans. And I think ultimately, to bring that about, it has to be, it's all about making counteroffers. That's what I really mourn for, not the lack of Palestinian acceptance of these plans, the lack of serious counteroffers. Yes, there's the Arab Peace Initiative from Saudi Arabia. I think that's not exactly a Palestinian counteroffer. It's a kind of a Saudi counteroffer. But I think honestly, I do believe that if we could, we put the Arab Peace Initiative on the table in one direction, and we put the Trump peace plan from the previous administration on the table in the other direction. If we could get somewhere in the middle, right? If we would go somewhere in the middle between those and find just find some level of middle ground, then there could be something that would offer Israeli security and would offer Palestinians peace and justice. And I sincerely believe that. And I think that is what we absolutely have to continue working towards.
Beautiful. We're going to do an after party on Discord in a few, but we have some audience questions. So if anybody else has a question, now's the time to ask. We'll prioritize super chats, of course, as always, and then we will take this to Discord. John, I know you also do something in the tech world, so I want to talk to you about that, because we're also building a very cool something tech related, all designed around dialogue and communication. So we could get into that in the Discord. Sure. So History Speaks is asking, we could call this a hard-hitting question. Can you ask John Aziz why he supported the early Israel starvation strategy, doesn't support it of murdering Palestinians in this regard, discredit his claim to be a peace activist and pro-Palestinian?
Yeah, I'd never supported that, and I think it's I'm extremely glad it was never implemented. Right? It's not you can't use starvation as a weapon of war. That's just beyond the pale, and I don't think anyone should.
Well, so we have that on the record. Where do you think, was that like a misunderstanding, or is that like a
I made a comment that in my mind was blaming Hamas for the situation that Palestinians were in, and a lot of people took that to mean that I was supporting starvation. I was advocating throughout the war, including from that very week, for things like airdrop aid packages to help the people of Gaza to get access to aid. It's incredibly important that the people of Gaza are able to get access to aid. It's incredibly important to differentiate between Hamas as an operational kind of terrorist group and the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza are not Hamas. The people of Gaza, in many cases, they're extremely critical of Hamas. In many cases, they're being oppressed by Hamas. So it's incredibly important to emphasize that's a completely it's not something that I would support, or that I ever supported, or that I do support. I would say that Hamas is somewhat to blame for the position that Palestinians were in, but of course Israel also has the agency over that, and I think it's by far the correct thing that aid flows in as much as possible to help the ordinary Palestinians. Of course, it actually helps Israeli hostages too if there's aid flowing in, because it means that eventually the Israeli hostages will also get a portion of that aid, hopefully. So it's a very dangerous thing to advocate for starvation as a weapon of war, and I certainly don't accept that I'm anti-war generally, right? I didn't want a war to begin with, right? I didn't want this conflict. Much less would I want people to be committing war crimes in this conflict. I want the conflict to stop. I certainly don't want war crimes within the conflict.
Cool. I'm glad we have that on the record. So you heard it here. There's no support for starvation as a weapon of war.
Or war. I'm against the war as well.
And for those who watch this channel, know that we've been covering that there's been no shortage of war crimes the past 16 or so months. And by no shortage, I mean a grotesque excess of war crimes. Anyways, Gianluca Mita goes, a very personal question. How do you deal with mad people from both sides when advocating peace? How welcome is your opinion amongst your communities? So, okay, I think this is an interesting question for both of us to dive into. And then from there, we'll bring it over to Discord.
How do we deal with mad people? Well, the conflict drives people mad, doesn't it? I think war is traumatizing, and I think trauma is something that has an impact on people's psyche and can lead to them essentially losing their marbles. Essentially, people could become incoherent in their hatred, or their desire for revenge, or their desire to destroy and defeat the other. I think that is somewhat inevitable in any conflict. I think that the people who are holding on to an idea of that there's something beyond this conflict, that there can be peace beyond this conflict, and there can be coexistence beyond this conflict. I think that the people who hold on to that idea that peace is a destination we can get to, we need to kind of move beyond the people who are so traumatized that they've lost their marbles, and we need to recognize each other and work together. And I think that it's a terrible tragedy and situation where people are so traumatized. It could be loss of family members, could be loss of your house, it could just be seeing people. There's all these utterly shocking images of people who have been bombed, people who have lost their limbs, people who have been, somehow mutilated by the war. This can radicalize people, and it can traumatize people, and that's why we have to stop this. The longer this goes on, the more people are going to be traumatized in this manner, and it's completely tragic and awful.
So yeah, at least my personal experience is that it's impossible to say anything about the conflict without being hated on. Even if you want to take the most sensible middle ground position, we're all humans, we all need to treat each other as such. That's a radical position in some circles. So dealing with hate comes with doing this work. If it's something that you're particularly sensitive to, then it's just probably not worth publicly speaking about it. I don't think we should have an expectation for people to be advocates or activists. People need to work within their own means. There's many ways to change the world. It could be by just being a good father, a good mother. You don't need to be on Twitter, on social media, taking stances that will just get backlash. So I don't think we should have that expectation of people. Sure, we should encourage people to join our cause, but it shouldn't come from like a place of pressure and shame rather than healthy encouragement. In terms of how, I mean, I get a lot of hate from both sides, but as of late, it's been even more so from the pro-Israel side. People calling me a capo and a traitor and a self-hating Jew. And obviously none of this stuff is true, but people are upset with what I'm saying. And it's very easy. It's much easier to engage in a personal attack than challenge someone on the merit of their ideas. So that's generally how I look at it. If somebody's engaging in a personal attack, it means they just don't have much they could say to challenge what I'm saying. And just a funny story, I don't really post on Facebook anymore because it's a dying platform. But the other day I posted something there, and something I posted on Twitter as well, but I posted there and people got pretty mad at me. And some guy tagged the Israeli police department on my post and said, you should investigate this guy. He's an anarchist and an Israel hater, and he's friends with a bunch of terrorists. He then sent me a DM saying, the Shabak, that's like the Israel equivalent of the FBI, they know about you. Next time you come to Israel, you'll be investigated. So like that, this is the kind of bullshit I need to deal with. And I told him, I responded, I said, look, either nothing's going to happen because there's no reason for them to question me and you just look like a fool, or they're going to question me and I'm going to leverage that to just make my voice louder. So you can't win, bro. And that was pretty much the end of it after he called me a traitor and said karma will get me.
Yeah, I've been called a lot of those things too. I'm not self-hating Jew. Pretty much everything else other than that, including the term capo. By the way, that gets leveraged against pro-peace Palestinians too. By the way, because the idea is that it's a comparison between the current conflict and the Holocaust, and therefore they say that I'm standing essentially a concentration camp guard, which is it's kind of an absurd argument really, because I don't want the Palestinian people to be in the situation that they're in. I'm kind of advocating for them to be in a completely wildly different situation where there's kind of much more normality and freedom and a normal life. So you have to kind of let it wash over you. To be quite honest, people's deranged, unhinged attacks against you. If you're having any level of impact in this arena where people are very traumatized and very charged, this is going to come. It comes at people, and I think ultimately it comes from the idea that these people have, which is that our side has to win. It's about winning. But ultimately, I don't view the conflict as a zero-sum game. This war is a negative-sum game because we're both losing. We're both losing this war. Palestinians are losing the war. Israelis ultimately are also losing the war by being in it and by participating in it. We have to have something different. We have to do something different. And we have to transform the conflict into not a zero-sum game, but a positive-sum game where we both benefit, and where Israelis are much more normalized in the family of nations, and where Palestinians have their own nation and their own state, and they can move much more freely, and they have some level of justice and recompense for the difficulties that they've gone through in the past nearly a century, right? So I think that the current situation sucks and we're both losing. Everyone's losing right now. This is bad for everyone, and we have to transform it so it's not bad for everyone, but it's good for everyone to live together in peace.
Beautifully put, John. Thank you so much. We're going to take this over to Discord. I dropped the link in the chat. There's also a link in the description. Once you join Discord on the left-hand side, it will say chill room. We're going to do this in the chill room. And yeah, I think, John, you could stay on for like another 15 or so for the after party.
That's
awesome. So this will be an opportunity to engage with John directly or just listen to the continuation of the conversation. So thank you all. And we will have another stream same time on Thursday. It's going to be with Doran Shafrir, an Israeli YouTuber and commentator. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion as well. Hope to see you all there.